Hi. In the second part on William Toel, I wanted to analyze a recent interview conducted by Austrian YouTuber Catherine Thurner. I introduced William Toel in my previous video, but briefly, his CV is all over the place and things he did and positions he had ranged from being in Vietnam to a US banker to academic of international finance to politician and writer. Also, he started talking publicly about certain issues much earlier, such as the migrant crisis. His YouTube and Telegram channels were started in summer 2021, where he said people should come to the River Rhine to mourn the dead from the Rheinwiesenlager and join a network on his website. He claims he will lead Germans to freedom within a few months, by February 2023 or so. Coming back to today's video, I wanted to discuss more his body language and statements he makes, and whether these could count as deceptive. Body language is nearly impossible to fake, as it largely bypasses conscious thought. Facial expressions change on a sub-second timescale and hence leak true feelings. If you try to control body language, it often does not match speech or has awkward delays and so is incongruent. Speech can be more easily controlled, but in order to avoid certain incriminating phrases, one has to constantly think of them, causing cognitive overload, unnatural pauses, and involuntary use of words related to the phrases one wants to avoid, because they're so present in your mind all the time. These can be called embedded confessions. I would imagine CIA agents and spies have learned certain tricks to avoid pitfalls, such as embedding deceptive statements within as much truth as possible. Omission is always easier than straight-out lying, or simply avoiding topics by relentlessly talking about something else, and similarly by creating diversions. And I think some of these can be seen here. Okay, so let's get started.
William, I'm so glad this happens. Actually, I was invited several times to have a conversation with you and it never would happen because, I don't know, it was in Germany, it was wherever. Now you came to my country.
Okay, here's the first red flag. She's flattered for being chosen, her ego is, and she pays him back later for mirroring him extensively. You can see this with her nodding and going along with the stories. See here, she's finally recognized, and that's how you get pulled in. I think he chose her because she's more emotional. She has a certain background which can be used. He didn't decide to talk to a banker or a math professor. He chose her.
To Austria. We are here next to Salzburg, the city of Mozart, but also very near to Braunau, which is a dark history, a dark German and Austrian history. And I think that's not a coincidence that we meet here in this place. I was brought up with the spirit of Mozart.
So it's interesting, she looks straight ahead a lot, sort of bypasses him. And he also doesn't look at her, which is odd. In her case, I thought in the beginning she looks into the wrong camera, but at the end they both look in the right camera. So I thought then there might be a flip chart here on the right side with some instructions or guidance, but then she has notes here in front of her which would look more natural to look at these. And he, on the other hand, seems to be absent-minded in a different world, which is not a good sign.
So yes, I let you say something to the topic that I choose.
Well, many people have heard me say that love is the only answer. And it sounds like a slogan, rather trite or superficial. But in reality, it is the only way that Germany can be healed, and it's the only way that Germany can ever be free. So I'm very well aware that we are not in Germany, no, and that we are in Austria. But when people ask me to compare and contrast, it is not possible for me to see two nations. I cannot see that.
So here we see her nodding. She pays him back with attention and being agreeable.
Austria has a special background and meaning for me. So wherever you would like to go, I'm ready for you.
Perhaps.
So he says, I'm ready for you, and looks down. That's normally a sign of guilt and shame. And I don't know why he says he's ready for her. He's much more prepared than what he's actually showing.
In Munich or wherever, the border police say, why are you here? Where are you going? And of course, I must say I'm an academic who studies international economics, and then they say, oh, fine, you can go. But that's not the way I view things. I don't view anything as an academic.
That's very odd. He was for decades an academic, and I don't think one can switch this off at all. And here in his videos, in general, in his speeches, he doesn't speak at all like an academic or banker. He doesn't speak like a very rational person. He talks in mystic anecdotes and symbolism, indicating he's not really truly himself.
As I look at it, from the way that I must see everything, Germany is like a young Frau, a young woman who was attractive, was naive, and who was full of idealism, but was unfocused. And so the young woman fell in love. And the book Constance's Child is a love story, and it's a love story about a young woman who was very naive, very, very simple, who lived in an idealistic world. She didn't know men, she didn't know how the world worked. She sat at her father's side in a station. She only heard secondhand about things. But
so he's directing the whole interview, the whole discussion about this little anecdote describing Germany as a silly little young woman. He uses the word naive a lot, which is ridiculous because Germany is so much older than the United States. You know, we can just think of the Germanic tribes, Germania, the province of the Roman empires and various kingdoms afterwards, and finally the German Empire before it all went sour with the Weimar Republic. That's the red flag. He spends most of the time on the silly story to avoid speaking about facts and saying the wrong thing. So he doesn't give any facts, for instance, what kind of patriotic forces he thinks will take over German government and lead Germany to freedom.
His problem as being a young Frau, a Fräulein in a way, in that sense, who fell in love and gave herself totally and completely. And her trust was absolute. It never dawned on her that anything could go wrong. And so in her idealism, she said, I am yours. I don't know how to pronounce it. I said, what, ihre Getreue? I am devoted to
Ja,
you.
ich bin dir treu ergeben.
Yeah,
So he says that he loves the German language. He visited Germany over 50 times, but he does not speak any German. So he wants to talk to thousands of Germans, but does not think it's worth the time to learn German. Surprisingly is that he hasn't learned it already. But this red flag was already mentioned last time.
And but she never allowed herself, Germany in the collective, never allowed herself to think that something could really go wrong, or that maybe it wouldn't work.
So the next red flag is that he touches his face a lot, his mouth, and then also his forehead. These are potential nonverbal signs of deception and stress. These are called adapters. Moving the hand to the mouth is somewhat symbolic. He is shushing himself. He is covering up his speech. So his body is betraying him. He doesn't want him to speak, especially when it's deceptive.
The way you love them. And so you have given yourself foolishly and openly and completely, and all of a sudden it collapses. So now, where do you turn? Well, there's a new lover in the neighborhood. The conqueror, the one who is...
I just talked about the non-verbal signs of deception. So laughing is also one of them. That could be a sign of stress as well. But it could also be duping delight. That's essentially when someone gets pleasure out of misleading someone and getting away.
The way you love them. And so you have given yourself foolishly and openly and completely, and all of a sudden it collapses.
So he uses the word naive and foolish in connection to Germany when he compares Germany to a little young naive girl, openly giving herself away to some guy. Later he talks about social intercourse. He uses all these words. He talks about makeup, hair and all this stuff, and new lover around the block and so on. He almost talks about Germany in terms of a whore. So these could be considered verbal signs of deceptions. These could be embedded confessions, because the topic is love here. Love is unconditional. And so that's why it is weird to come up with these words. You don't say you love someone and then say you don't love certain parts. So you can't love someone and then criticize this person at the same time. So that's a sign that there's something else in this context.
So now, where do you turn? Well, there's a new lover in the neighborhood. The conqueror, the one who is now everywhere. The British, the Americans, the French, the Russians, from all over, from 50 different, and they're everywhere. And they have chocolate and...
So again, Germany's a whore. It's sometimes hard to get the nuances. Say I'm not there at the interviews, the environment, and this might also cause stress and other things. But we have her at this interview. So she's a bit like a mirror. And what her reflections are tells us about the situation and about the interview as well. So on one hand, she's mirroring him, she's nodding, she's rewarding him for being chosen. But she also looks in part confused, especially when he keeps going on talking about Germany as a naive young woman. And so that indicates it's not just me interpreting into it, but she's there and giving me signs that this is actually a good interpretation.
Work and security and food and a warm bed.
So he still talks about Germany. It's a young woman, it's a little whore.
And a shelter and a bathroom, and you can have it all, but now you must love me. But she doesn't love them. Okay. So now she simply falls out of love without
He's laughing again. So that could be duping delight or an indicator of stress.
falling back into love again. And she pretends. She learns to be a pretender. And, you know, this...
Another negative word. Pretender. Naive, foolish, a pretender. And she is confused.
It's hard to say because my love for Germans is so great. But German women...
Love for Germany is so great, he was laughing. So that could be really a duping delight.
German women are attractive in their features and in their formation. They are
So that's so strange. He talks about the attractiveness of German women. So we can see what's on his mind.
You know, this young Frau, when she was in love with her original lover, and she would dress pretty, and she had her hair pretty, and she had her makeup pretty, and she wanted to be beautiful for him because she loved everything about him. And
Again, he was laughing, potentially duping Delight, and she looks confused. And he's controlling the story. He doesn't want to talk about the actual important topics. He's just talking about this little story. He's diverting, he's directing, and so on.
betrayal. And so they have, on a scale of 10, Germans live between a 5.5 and a 5.7. But they're satisfied with that because it is relatively risk-free.
Here he talks a lot of truth, but that's how it works. Embed things in truthful statements to win people over.
And German women are the key. Women are always the key. Men are, resonates. So it's true. I said, I love you. And they said, that's impossible. You must be a betrayer. You must be a deceiver. Because why would you love us? We're not lovable. We don't look lovable. We get our hair cut funny. We don't dress in a way that's sexy or feminine. And so no one loves us.
So he used the word sexy.
And now you love us. Yes, I love you. And I can't help it. I love you passionately. Okay? I am deeply in love with you. No one has ever said that before.
Something about the German women, yeah.
Okay? Because this is what we've learned in school from kindergarten. It's what reinforced every day. Every time you have social intercourse with anyone, it's
interesting graphic words, social intercourse. It's really like a red thread which goes through this whole interview about German women, their sexiness, their hair.
We're still nodding our head today. And but I asked the question, and a professor is allowed to ask it, what if? Now, the main doctors of philosophy in both in Austria and in Germany have said for years, for hundreds of years, that history is not a science. It's not.
So he touches his face a lot, but I think he also has a cold because later he blows his nose.
So that's the situation we have today. And here's one old man, a very old man, who, I got off the plane this time, and I had, please forgive me for it, but at least I had to get me a roll stool because I actually had to have help to get back. I had to have help to get to the car. And yet I'm here.
He touches his face a lot. So it's another way to be potentially deceptive by explaining how old and weak he is to make him look unthreatening. So why stress something like that? It's another way to pull people into his little story.
And it pulled in, and it actually is almost painful how tightly it's held. And they're terrified to keep it open, terrified. So I have to say to them, you can trust me because I'm in love with you and I can't harm you. It's impossible for me to harm you, okay? So, and it's amazing. Maybe people will actually come up and sometimes...
So again, he portrays himself as being someone who can't hurt anyone. The old weak guy. There was a bit of laughter when he said that.
And hold on so tight, And it's funny. If you're a 65-year-old man and you get a hug, it's lecherous. It's not good. But if you're a 77-year-old man and you get a hug, it's cute. So it's okay,
So again, talking about him being weak and said we can trust him.
Because he's so old, he can't do anything anyhow.
Yeah,
so
I understand.
So anyhow, that's the situation that we have. We have a beautiful young woman who was idealistic, and she gave herself entirely.
So 23 minutes into this 41-minute long interview, and he comes back and again to this story. And she looks confused, or even so she nods a lot and is very agreeable.
Everything that was precious to her, she said, here, because I don't just love you as a man, I love you as a way of life. I love you as the smell of the ground and the mountains and the streams and everything that has to do with...
He talks about all these details which have nothing to do with the important questions. He's completely distracting from important issues which should be discussed.
I think what you describe is we had this German, which is Austria, of course, also in that time it was one. And we had this German romanticism. We had Schiller, and we had those also in the painting.
So Catherine is talking actually for the first time.
Yes, about love, about the longing of love, about the yearning. And what you said, very female, very hard, from the heart. And very perhaps naive, I'm not innocent.
So here, that's good. She's correcting him, so she's picking up on the word naive, and she's using innocent instead. But nevertheless, a lot of the things she says is picking up on details of the story and going along with it.
I would call it innocent, very innocent. And that was before. You did describe what came afterwards, because before you had a young man who yearned for love, like Schiller, and a young woman who was ready to be loved in all her innocence.
Yes.
And
she's mirroring him, she's rewarding him for having picked her for the interview.
To be in a real partnership, in a real love. Emotionally grow up. Yes. I think, isn't it you said that once, that the German have to grow up emotionally?
Yes, they're retarded emotionally.
Yeah.
They're
So here's another really bad word he uses for the Germans, retarded. And we see her facial expression. And it came out because I think he was surprised. He wasn't prepared now to speak. He sort of jumped in and so used the wrong word.
They're still backward emotionally. They're unable to absorb the shocks of life. And so they have to live in a
Laughing again.
World that isn't real. In a way, they're still
living in a world which isn't real.
In a straitjacket. When you go, put the jacket on backward so that you cannot move. And the problem is, it has now been so long, from Bletchley Park. And
so he touched his face and he closed his eyes. These are signs of stress. So there's something going on.
Of course, the Rhine-Wiesenlager was so hidden from everyone, they didn't even know it existed. Here's 800,000 young, mostly 40% young children who were murdered, and nobody even knows it. They're not allowed to know it, and they're not allowed to ask questions. But now, the word Rhine-Wiesenlager can be mentioned in Berlin or Munich or Hamburg.
So he's mixing in a lot of truth.
We get love in when we're locked up still. And the obvious questions that, I've been teaching for, 34 years now. I've had students from 8.
He touched his forehead again and closed his eyes, signs of stress.
That is why when I go, I can't control how people think about me, but I have to be wide open and transparent. There can't be anything about me that is ever hidden. Okay? So, and I am sent for this purpose. Lisa and I have been married 34 years. And she knew from the first day, you have a purpose, and in the end, it has to end in a certain way. And that is, you must die that they may live. And she knew it, and I knew it, and so now the time is close, all right? But the only way.
There's a lot of strange things happening here. So he has been married for 34 years. She's telling him that his purpose is to die for it. So that sounds really strange. It sounds a bit like she's his handler. And that's a massive red flag. So he's imitating Jesus. He sacrificed himself. So no one can now question his true motivation because he's doing that for the Germans, even though no one asked for it. And he also used guilt again, because the idea of sacrificing himself is that the Germans are guilty and that they can't do it themselves and someone else has to bring the sacrifice. So it's again the guilt trip, a big red flag.
There's too much guilt, and now it has to be reversed, and you are helping as a watchman, or we can also say, like my work also is some sort of, what's the midway? Midwife. Yes, some sort of a midwife, to help to turn.
So she's getting herself on his side, he's a watchman, she's a midwife, she's taking on her new role, being selected by William Toel.
To turn it around.
So it's about her ego in some sense. So that's how people get pulled in.
We're now close to that. I can feel it. I don't want to go through what I have to go through, but that's what I was born for. So I have to go through it. And so
he's talking again about sacrificing himself, and she gets really excited, like there's something so special at that moment she's witnessing, and so on and so on.
If I could avoid it and go play golf, I would do so. But I can't. And I am deeply in love with a eternal sense of Germanness that is unchanging, and it does have its own beauty. Let me tell you one other thing, and then we'll have to stop because I do need time. But the young girl we talked about, the innocent young girl, maybe she was 17 or 18 years old even.
So 36 minutes into the interview, it's almost over, and he says already afterwards he has to do something else. He gives a talk. He's bridging the time with his little story again, Germany's a silly little girl. So it's all about that the whole time. Nothing meaningful is being discussed.
And she was full of idealism, and she wanted to be loved. She desperately wanted to be loved. And this man was the ideal lover for her, because he represented everything. It wasn't just that he had hair or eyes. He represented everything that she loved, okay? But she's in her room, and I have to say, I am here for you to test. And if you find me to be false, then you will know, then you're free. But maybe...
Very open hand gesture. He's stressing how he can be questioned.
What if somebody made up a fiction novel and sold it to you as if it were history when it had no basis of fact whatsoever?
So there's a lot of truth inside, of course. That's how it works.
Yes.
Well,
and you may say that, and no German would have. People often say, well, you are German, you don't speak German, but nobody in Germany could have said what you have said. I mean, you gave us the story, not the story, you gave us the facts about Bletchley Park. I knew something about it, but I was very, very curious. And so I got, and even me as being half Belgian and half Austrian, I can say more, but not altogether. But what you...
So that's how it works. She basically explains it. No one else could say these kind of things, so that's why he has to be a good guy. And that's how the deception could work. And because he spoke so openly about these things, in return, he can't be questioned.
Who I am is revealed only by a series of circumstances. The circumstances reveal all the questions that people have.
So he's talking in riddles. He's trying to be mysterious.
Okay, but I can't get ahead of those circumstances because otherwise the story is twisted. Now we have an old twisted story, and now we have a new twisted story. The Germans cannot handle that. They cannot be betrayed this time.
The Germans can't handle it.
Yes, okay. You're right. May I hug you?
Oh, of course.
I'm so glad, William. I thank you. Yeah. I'm so glad. And we say goodbye?
Okay.
So now they look in the right camera. So in summary, we saw multiple red flags, in particular signs one could interpret as being deceptive. So there were the adapters, which are signs of stress, the touching of the mouth and the forehead, and also the closing of the eyes, and even some nervous laughing or duping delights, the pleasure one gets out of misleading others. So he controlled also the flow of the interview by talking about the silly story where Germany is described as a naive young woman or whore. He spoke about love for the Germans, but then criticizing them. It could be considered an embedded confession, revealing his true intentions or his true feelings. And then he also made himself look weak and old and innocent multiple times. And then finally he compared himself with Jesus, who sacrificed himself, and that removes any doubt about him, that he must be a good guy because he does the ultimate thing. So if he's deceptive, some might ask then why he's doing it. So he might want to discourage Germans to resist over the next few months, which might be the key for the new agenda. Or he might have wanted an address list of people resisting the regime so they can get special treatment. Or, as many trust him, he could use that trust and later mislead them in the key moment. For instance, when the new so-called patriotic government is installed in Germany, or if the Russians invade Germany, who knows, to install communism. So people won't question these events and follow the new agenda, thinking it's a good thing. So I think I stop here. Thank you so much for listening. I'm very much interested in reading your comments. I read them for the last video as well, which encouraged me to make that one. Yeah, and I hope you liked my analysis, and I talk to you next time. Bye.